In his fifth Philippic, the Roman orator Marcus Tullius Cicero said that the sinews of war are infinite money. And sometimes in the age of GPUs and big data, it feels like the sinews of research, too, have become infinite money. Indeed, the academic researcher despairs when a 1,000-pound gorilla enters the arena. Has all my work been in vain? And how can I hope to compete with this infinite money? Right before Thanksgiving, Meta announced their new model, CICERO. It was built on their previous search bot, which could play a good game of no-press diplomacy. And if you don't know what diplomacy is, and you don't know the basics of CICERO, I'm not going to explain them here. This video is already too long as it is. If you're here though, I'm going to assume you know what the variants of diplomacy are and how the game works, and the general idea of how CICERO plays the game. While infinite money buys you a big PR campaign, it's important not to downplay how important CICERO is from a technical perspective. Here are the main contributions as I see it. Creating a good strategy, communicating with people about what the agent is going to do in terms of that strategy, and 3, reacting to those communications, learning from gameplay data. Here's my working hypothesis of what CICERO is: a steamroller gunboat bot that dominates any game without communication. But when there is communication, it can do basic coordination with allies. If that is true, I think that it is an unfounded claim that AI has mastered diplomacy, which is what you see if you go to science.org, where the CICERO paper was published. And I should say up front that as somebody who has been working on NLP to analyze the language of diplomacy since 2015, I'm a little salty because the CICERO paper didn't do a very good job of recognizing previous work. This may make me a little biased, so you should critically examine everything that I say here, just like you should critically examine the claims in the CICERO paper. For example, in talking about the previous Albert bot, they didn't mention that Albert does communicate, albeit with DAID primitives, Lisp-like propositions that can convey alliances and actions on the board. The way it's written in the paper makes it sound like Albert can only play gunboat, which just isn't true. CICERO is a huge advance, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the first AI to play the game with communication. In my opinion, the CICERO publication also doesn't do the best job of connecting and contrasting to previous work using NLP for diplomacy. I'm very biased here, but we created a lie detector for the game of diplomacy. A very similar step is a part of CICERO, but our work is not cited in that context, even though they get to the same 5% number that we did in 2020. And I'm also not sure why all but 2 of the authors were erased in the citation. Now, let's not make too much of this. Some people are more generous than others with their citations, but I mentioned it here to show my cards, to tell you where I'm coming from up front. Because emotions can cause people to do things, and rhetorical strategies like deception and persuasion can be more or less effective with an emotional appeal. Oh, and guess what? That's exactly what's happening in the game of diplomacy. And that's why we argued that the language of diplomacy is so interesting in this 2015 paper. And a final disclaimer here, I'm speaking for myself, not my team, not my institution, not my funders. The opinions here are entirely my own. And I also want to make it clear that I, Jordan Boyd Graber, am not saying that CICERO Delinda S. CICERO is awesome, and I'm not trying to be a Schmidhuber here. It really is a huge advance over prior work. And it's great that they're open sourcing their code. But I don't want the meta PR machine to cause you, and the public in general, to think that the game of diplomacy is mastered. Just like how question answering wasn't mastered when IBM went on Jeopardy! If a funding agency were thinking about how to build a program around the awesome new avenues of research that CICERO has unlocked, my suggestion would be focus on grounding, robustness, cooperation, and deception. Let's talk about these one at a time, where CICERO still has room for improvement and where there's opportunity for other researchers to improve on CICERO. First off, grounding. A common criticism of large language models is that they just make stuff up. A true NLP application should be well grounded in reality. Diplomacy is a great test of whether these language models can be effectively grounded. CICERO obviously passes this test to some extent. If it didn't know what was going on, it would ask England to move its fleet to Vienna in 1900, which makes no sense. That CICERO does know what's going on the board and can effectively coordinate shows that to some extent it is grounding effectively. There are a few examples in the CICERO paper about how a lack of grounding might, however, still be a problem. For example, the paper gives this really interesting example of how Russia says that England has agreed to do something, and then Cicero, playing as England, would just do it. These things have to be filtered out by the planning process. And this is less of a problem for the short blitz games that Cicero plays on, where discussions are short and any mistakes can be quickly corrected and detected. But for longer messages, where you have to coherently negotiate over more turns with longer messages, I suspect that flaws are more likely to come up. And this is not just about grounding in the board game. In non-blitz games, part of the joy of the game is talking about things outside of the game, or about the meta aspects of the game, no pun intended. One player bemoaned that Cicero didn't engage in friendly banter after the game ended. In one of our games from the 2020 dataset, which we released, we had a long exchange where a player carefully built up a history of being a Boy Scout who went to a camp in Maine. Here it is starting off at the beginning of the game, but it carried throughout the rest of the game. Now, all of this was made up, and we know this because we annotated who was lying, but it was part of a careful world-building exercise to build rapport and trust with the person he was talking to. But nevertheless, a computer agent outside of a blitz game would need to A, keep up with this kind of nonsense, B, respond appropriately in the moment, C, remember it for the rest of the game, and D, respond appropriately later in the game. This really didn't come up in Cicero's blitz games because nobody was expecting it, but this sort of breakdown could help demonstrate that an opponent were a computer, particularly given Cicero's limited time horizons. The Cicero paper proudly reports that nobody suspected that they were playing against a computer. Some people on Twitter took that to mean that Cicero has passed the Turing test. That's just not the case. As a refresher, a Turing test needs a skilled interrogator, an unrestricted set of topics, and explicit knowledge that it is a Turing test. This failed on all three counts. The players were not skilled in what makes an AI, the setup of blitz games significantly constrains the conversation, and nobody told the players that they might be facing off against a computer. Next up, robustness. Speaking of humans facing off against computers, as we quickly discovered with question answering in the aftermath of the Watson victory, and the Go community discovered after the AlphaGo AlphaZero victories, was that you often need different strategies to successfully compete with computers. Cicero winning a tournament where the players didn't know they were playing against a computer would be very different than if a tournament happened today. And these impressive results, where the players didn't know that their opponent was not normal, is not evidence of robustness. And indeed, it is an implicit admission that they were afraid of what would happen if players knew their opponent might have been a computer. In particular, it's possible that Cicero has a limited bag of tricks. Given a particular state configuration, it will always act the same way. You can see this by having a Cicero bot play against itself. It quickly devolves into a redundant echo chamber. This is unsurprising. It's meant to pick the best strategy given the situation. But given that there is only one best move that can be represented by the state, Cicero would then be predictable. But that predictability can be a liability, as we know from mixed strategies in game theory. Back when I was playing diplomacy at Caltech 20 years ago, one person in our group wrote down multiple sets of orders, showed them to the other players, explicitly flipped a coin or two to decide what he was going to do, and then submitted the corresponding sheet. In some cases, this was a formidable strategy. Nobody, including him, knew what was going to happen. In real diplomacy, you need to be able to deal with this uncertainty and inject some of that uncertainty yourself. While diplomacy prides itself on being deterministic once the orders are submitted, the uncertainty comes from the people you're talking to. Like with many text-based AI systems, I suspect that Cicero is relatively brittle when evaluated off policy, which will cause it to not cope well with this uncertainty. In NLP, we've seen things like adversarial examples, universal triggers, false presuppositions, and more, just from Eric Wallace, that have tripped up existing systems. So what will it take for Cicero to remain competitive when humans have had the chance to learn its bag of tricks? And how long will it take for Cicero to adapt to those countermeasures? Next up, cooperation and communication versus raw tactic. After Kasparov was defeated by IBM's Deep Blue, his reaction was not to stop playing chess, but rather to think about the ways that humans and computers can work together. And for many years after that, the best computer players in the world were neither humans nor computers, but humans and computers working together. This so-called centaur chess lasted for about a decade, and I think it's safe to say that computers have indeed mastered chess. We saw the same thing with question answering. Computers excel at accessing all of the world's information, but humans can deal with complicated syntax and wordplay. Together, humans and computers are much better than either alone. I suspect that there's a similar interplay with diplomacy, but unlike chess, a centaur agent will likely prevail for much longer. Given how emotional and how messy diplomacy can be, you don't just need to parse the syntax and semantics of a long message, you also need to predict the emotional impact of what you're going to say. I think that Cicero is really good at assessing board position and using that to its advantage, and I'm even prepared to say that it's far better than humans there. But I've not seen clear evidence that it's better than humans when it comes to communicating, particularly when relationships are on the line. I would have loved to see an experiment with a variant of Cicero where you combine very simple communication primitives. I'm going to do X, I want you to do Y, and then the player could respond yes, no, on top of a top-notch tactics engine like SearchBot. I'm guessing the outcome wouldn't be that different in terms of the number of wins for Cicero. And I think that's a drawback of this work. There are some claims being thrown about that Cicero can detect lies or persuade. Perhaps appropriately, I don't find these very persuasive. To make these kinds of social science arguments, you need to instrument the game to detect when those things are happening. So what kind of instrumentation could you do to measure if Cicero is actually persuasive? I think you should have people say, before any moves happen, here's what I am going to do this season. Let's call this P. Cicero can also make statements of what it wants other players to do. Let's call this Q. When P equals Q, this isn't persuasion, it's luck. Or they were thinking the same way. When orders become Q after communication, this actually is persuasion. And then you could explicitly say that Cicero was persuasive. And this is exactly what we did in our 2020 paper for deception. We asked players to annotate whether they were telling the truth when they send messages, and annotate if they think the messages they receive are true. This can let us say whether our computer was as good as a human at detecting the lies. And while the number of lies found were comparable to the Cicero paper, the kinds of lies humans and computers could detect were quite different. But let's focus on deception a little bit more. Is deception actually important? Taking a step back, suppose that you built a baseball-playing robot that was preternaturally good at hitting dingers out of the park. But it couldn't catch a ball to save its electronic life and can only move at 2 miles an hour around the bases. I imagine it beeping constantly as it does so. Oh, and it can pitch, but it only sends balls straight down the middle. It ends up winning a bunch of games because it's indefatigable and can outscore the weak humans. Does this mean that it has mastered baseball? I think most people would argue that no, there's more to baseball than hitting dingers. You need to run, catch, throw a ball, pitch curveballs and sliders.
Now, Wireless Joe Jackson, there was a blurn-hitting machine.
Exactly. He was a machine designed to hit blurns. I mean, come on. Wireless Joe was nothing but a programmable bat on wheels.
Oh, and I suppose Pitching That 5000 was just a modified howitzer.
It's the same with diplomacy. To master diplomacy, you need to be able to detect lies and imminent betrayal from other players. And I'd also say, as a sometimes amateur player of diplomacy, you need to execute betrayal as well. This was also the conclusion of the excellent Economist write-up of Cicero, although I disagree that another game has fallen. To quote, "Seasoned diplomacy players will, though, want to know something else. Has it learned how to stab? Stabbing, saying one thing and doing another, especially attacking a current ally, is seen by many as diplomacy's defining feature." But though Cicero did strategically withhold information from players in gameplay, it did not actually stab any of its opponents. Perhaps it was this final lack of Machiavellian ruthlessness which explains why it was only in the top 10% and not Victor Lodorum. SearchBot, the uncommunicative predecessor of Cicero, shows that the underlying tactics are strong. And now with Cicero, there's some level of communication. That coordination is valuable, but I wish there were more ablation experiments to really tease apart how many of Cicero's wins came from good moves and how many came from smooth talking. That's because betraying someone in diplomacy takes some real finesse. This is something that we talked about in our 2015 paper using natural language processing to understand and predict betrayal in diplomacy games. We found things like a human betrayal typically has less communication, less discussion of the future, and fewer requests. This is the sort of thing that true mastery of diplomacy would entail. Hiding a deception by avoiding the subject, subtly shading the future, slowly disengaging from a relationship. This is what would make Cicero's play more human, feeling an odd vibe or holding a grudge. And again, this is where Centaur play would be more valuable. As I mentioned before, I've seen no evidence that Cicero is particularly good at detecting deception. There's also no indication that Cicero has a clear strategy of when it's going to deceive another player. Deception is not just about saying the sky is lime when it's blue. It seems that Cicero's understanding of deception is that you need to censor some messages. The decoder from the large language model might generate some things that give away your plan, so you don't want to say that. Or it will disregard a message if somebody's obviously trying to hoodwink you. But what deception really is about is how to get Austria to be greedy, believe that it will profit handsomely from taking Warsaw, but then in doing so creates an opening for you to nab Silesia. In everything that I've heard from the Cicero team, they have downplayed deception in their bot. But deception in diplomacy, though rare, is an important and worthy area of study. This is what people think of when they think of diplomacy, not the intricacies of convoys or support structures. Okay, to wrap up, if Cicero does not want to engage with deception and betrayal, cooperation, and robustness in diplomacy, then that's fine by me. Their technical achievements are, and I don't want this to get lost in the rest of my message, truly impressive. And I appreciate their open sourcing of tools. After all, the sinews of research are infinite money. It's hard to compete. So I hope that their foray into the language of diplomacy can help jumpstart people looking at the fascinating language of diplomacy and to pay attention to what really makes the game fun. If that happens, hopefully more people will see why we've been looking at this game of deception and persuasion for 7 years now. Because I don't believe that diplomacy has been mastered. And you shouldn't be deceived by what you see when you go to science.org. But if you think that Cicero has indeed solved diplomacy, I'm open to persuasion. Just stay out of Trieste. This is just one video from a course that I'm teaching. If you want to get the whole context, check out the course webpage, linked below. There you can find all of the videos in the right order. YouTube likes to show you older videos out of order, homeworks, exercises, and recommended readings. And if you want to help other people find videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe to provide a big gradient to the algorithm.